Over 2,500 years ago, God's people were able to return to their home in Israel. They'd been away for some sort of 70 years in Babylon, not on some extended holiday, but taken captive by King Nebuchadnezzar II, and who over a period of many years, he'd killed many, and it finally accumulated into a siege of the city of Jerusalem. He destroyed the Jewish temple, and he left the city in ruins. Finally, the people did return, and under the direction of a man called Ezra, the Jewish people experienced a revival, a new zeal for God. And God led Ezra to lead the people to rebuild the destroyed temple. However, not all was well. You see, there was a slight problem. There was a slight problem with the city walls. After 50 years of the temple being rebuilt, the walls still lay in ruin. Now you might think, why would that be a problem? I mean, after all, wasn't the temple at that time the focus of worship to God? Surely having the temple should have been enough without having to worry about some mere wall. But God's plan to restore the nation of Israel required both the sacred, that being the temple, and the secular, that being the wall. Without a wall, no city at that time was safe. It wasn't safe from bandits, gangs, wild animals, and the temple, with all its riches and richness, would have been a particular risk. I mean, practically speaking, no wall means no city, and no city means no temple. So without a wall, there could be something strange in your neighbourhood. There could be something weird, and it don't look good. Who are you going to call? It's not going to be Ghostbusters, I assure you. God needed to call someone who had the necessary skills to complete the task of rebuilding. It wasn't somebody with a gift of serving. A server might tend to want to do it all themselves, and if that was the case, they'd still be rebuilding that wall today. It wasn't somebody with the gift of teaching. Now Ezra, he did have this gift, and through his teaching, yes, he did get the temple rebuilt, because he reminded the people that they needed an altar to sacrifice their offerings to God. No temple, then no presence of God, and all the blessing that would come with that. Also, the gifts of encouraging and giving and mercy, important as they are, would they have fully mobilized the people to start putting brick on brick? God needed somebody who could basically give the people a boot up the backside. Done, of course, in love. God needed a vigorous, visionary leader, full of integrity and honesty, because the task was huge. Rebuilding the temple would look like a walk in the park to comparison to this task. And what was the size of the task? Well, the completed wall would have been over 2.5 miles long, with an average height of 40 feet and an average thickness of over 8 feet. We are talking humongous. And God's choice for such a project was a man called Nehemiah. And Nehemiah didn't let God down in this, because Nehemiah managed to complete that entire rebuild in 52 days. Not weeks, not months, not years, but 52 days. So, what did Nehemiah have to make him God's choice in this incredible endeavour? This morning, as we continue our series on the motivational spiritual gifts, we'll be looking at the gift of leadership, using some examples from Nehemiah. We all might have a different idea on what makes a great leader. Rosalind Carter, the wife of Jimmy Carter, once said, "A leader takes people where they want to go. A great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but ought to be." We may even have a different idea about what leadership actually is. Donald McGannon, a TV executive, wisely once said, "Leadership is not an action. Leadership is an action, not a position." And when we read from the book of Romans, chapter 12, verses 8, and look at the book of Corinthians, chapter 12, we get sort of different English words for the leadership, depending on which translation we use. So the gift of leadership has also been translated to ruleth. That's the King James version. Ruleth. Superintend, authority, presides, put in charge, he who gives aid, guidance, facilitator, organizer, administration. There's a Greek word, kybernesis, and that has sometimes been translated as administration, and it means to steer or to guide. And it's like a helmsman put in charge of getting a ship to its destination. And John Maxwell, he said, the pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist expects it to change. The leader adjusts the sails. But more importantly, it's not what the gift is necessarily called, but it's the manner in which it should be done. And again, the various Bible translations say the gift of leadership should be done with zeal, with passion, diligence, do our best, carefulness, work hard at it, in earnest care, don't manipulate, with energy, eager to get started. I mean, it does sound a little bit like this gift of leadership could be a jack of all trades and a master of none, so to speak. But as we look at the example of Nehemiah, we'll see that this is not the case. And before we do that, I probably just need to mention that this is about the spiritual gift of leadership, not the position of leadership. When we think of leadership, our minds tend to go towards those that hold a particular office. And so it depends on what sort of, running through our mind, the church denomination has. We could be thinking of a priest or a pastor or a vicar. We could be thinking of a deacon, a verger, or an elder. And of course, it is helpful for those in a position of leadership to have the gift of leadership. Organising, facilitator, administrator, or whatever you want to call it. But a leadership team needs to be made up of people with a whole variety of motivational gifts. We need those that see the vision and the goals, those that have a particular emphasis on mercy and giving, those that serve and, as we heard last week, encourage. Obviously, as the organisation gets larger, the greater the organisational needs of the body will be. So when we're thinking of that, and because we have a God of order and not chaos, if there aren't any organising leaders in a position of leadership, then of course they need to be sought out and used within a leadership team. And just for the purpose of not confusing you, and probably more importantly, not confusing myself, I'll refer to the gift of leadership as being a facilitator, so as not to start the mindset that people in a position of leadership always need to have this gift, which is certainly not the case. So, getting back to Nehemiah. Nehemiah, one of the great facilitators in the Old Testament, who God used to rebuild the wall around the city of Jerusalem. So how did this gift of facilitation enable Nehemiah to complete his task? Well, firstly, when Nehemiah heard that the wall had not yet been built, he started the proceedings by mourning and fasting and praying. He cried out to God about the situation, confessing his and the people's sins. He knew that God was in charge and that God should be put first, remembering that he was just a servant of God. In such a position, facilitators need to remember this. And they mustn't let pride or the position of authority over others go to their head. The Apostle Paul recognised this by referring to himself, the Apostle Paul, a great leader, a great facilitator, but he referred to himself as a servant of Jesus Christ. Nehemiah understood first and foremost that the task was by the appointment of God. And it was under God's direction that he would fulfill this. Secondly, Nehemiah knew that he had to assess the situation. What was the wall like exactly? So he went and examined the ruined wall. A person with a gift of serving may have only seen one problem at a time, but it comes naturally to a gifted facilitator to see the big picture. A facilitator will find it easy to visualise the final result of the rebuilt wall and what that would take to accomplish it. If a facilitator isn't in a position of authority like Nehemiah was, then they will simply if they are in a position of authority, like Nehemiah, then they will simply direct the people based on their giftings and the bigger picture. But if they're not in a position of authority and their counsel is not heeded in what should proceed, then they could react, they could become discouraged, and certainly when their steps are not implemented. Thirdly, Nehemiah knew that others had to do the work. Like I say, he'd still be rebuilding it, wouldn't he, if it was just himself. There was a lot of wall. A lot of wall. A facilitator knows which tasks to delegate and which they must do themselves. They're able to sense who will need more assistance than others and can naturally maintain an accountability with their workers. They must also make sure that they don't delegate their own responsibilities to others to avoid work, because this could then lead to them becoming open to the accusations of laziness and irresponsibility. Nehemiah could sense the best person for a particular job. So fourthly, a person with the gift of facilitating has an ability to discern the strengths and weaknesses and talents of others. Their focus is not on how the job can be done, but rather on who can do it best. They can use the unusable, but they can easily discern true character. They can recognise a sloth and remove them from the team if necessary. If the task is not too large, unlike the wall, then because of the completion of any project requires faithful workers, the facilitator tends to have a few reliable workers than many that they cannot count on. They do this in order to achieve maximum efficiency, not as a means to express favouritism or to avoid work. The thing is, though, projects could be given priority over people, which may lead to the facilitator taking an interest in others to find out the best way to use them rather than the best way to serve them. The facilitator could even end up building loyalty with favouritism and view people merely as resources. And people, as you would expect, tend to feel used and discarded when their usefulness is over. Also, if the project becomes the priority and a serious character flaw is discovered in a valuable worker, then the facilitator may be reluctant to deal with the situation out of a fear of losing them. This could easily lead to a sense by other people of approval and acceptance of that bad behaviour. And that could cause a reaction, as you can well imagine, or even worse, imitation of the bad behaviour by others. Fifthly, Nehemiah had the skill to organise both human and material resources in the rebuilding of the wall. He was able to take this seemingly impossible task and break it down into achievable goals. Remember, 2.5 miles long, 40 feet high, 8 feet thick. A gifted facilitator has the rather annoying ability to make jobs look easy. Now, this can serve them well, because people may not lose heart so quickly if the task seems too large or difficult to them. A facilitator would notice what others might consider insignificant, recognising all the essential components necessary to complete the project. Nehemiah not only made the project look easy, but he also made things easy for others. And he was not a personal burden himself. Facilitators are a sacrificial people. Sixthly, Nehemiah was able to handle opposition from the inside, and I mean the inside as his own workers, as well as from outside people that weren't part of the rebuild. He knew that he had to exert continual pressure, or the final goal of completing the rebuild would not take place. And because he could visualize the final goal, he was able to quickly evaluate requests and situations and make firm decisions. A facilitator is able to be decisive, patiently addressing the frustrations of their workers, handling pressure extremely well. And even if misunderstood, they will press on to the final goal. A facilitator, however, needs to listen to valid suggestions. And if they don't handle grievances or are unresponsive to direction from their authorities, pressure will build to the point of them becoming harsh or even to resign. This could result in patterns of pride and resentment. Leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by a people who have nothing to say. Also, a facilitator's decisiveness can lead to making decisions based on what's best for the project and not what is most convenient for the workers, which, as you can imagine, could be a very good thing, because obviously the project needs to be completed. But this could also lead to the facilitator earning a reputation of being cold-hearted or unconcerned, which is not usually true. And secondly, it may seem that they are forcing decisions on other people. The facilitator needs to be careful that they are not coercing others to help them achieve their own personal ambitions, or being insensitive to others' weariness or personal priorities. And lastly, Nehemiah had a great sense of timing. He knew how long things would take. He was very efficient in completing the project very quickly, 52 days. And this drive for efficiency in a facilitator will lead to placing workers according to their strengths and weaknesses so that maximum productivity can be achieved. However, a facilitator is still very willing to take whatever time is needed to do the job well. It's not all about efficiency and productivity. It's about they want to see the job done well. In Nehemiah's case, the job went very well, didn't it? Through his motivational drive to lead others, accomplishing the task through analysis and delegation. If it doesn't go quite as well, then the immature facilitator will delegate the blame just as easily as they delegate the work. A good leader will take more than their share of the blame and a little less than their share of the credit. A facilitator's final joy comes when they see all the parts coming together. A facilitator is fulfilled when they see the job complete, but sometimes they can be a bit quick to move on to a new job before making proper provision for the maintenance of the completed project. Do you think that you may have the motivational spiritual gift of a facilitator, organizer, administrator, leader, whatever you want to call it? The word facilitator means promoting the ease of any action or operation. And through this gift, a facilitator maintains the church by making things easy for others. You'll probably agree with me that the church doesn't need a lot of facilitators, but it does need some for the efficient operation of the body of Christ. The facilitator leads others to complete projects. They may not necessarily do the job, but through organisation and delegation, they make sure the job gets done. Nehemiah got the job done. And in doing so, he didn't glorify himself, but glorified God, helping the people to grow and thrive beyond the current generation. I just finish with one final tongue-in-cheek quote by Benjamin Hooks. If you think you are leading and turn around to see no one following, then you're just taking a walk. The gifted facilitator, as we must remember, it's a gift from God. There's a spiritual dimension to all these things, and God provides us with all the abilities and resources to fulfill those. Let's pray.